Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, founder of the Family Office Association and host of the Angelo Robles podcast. Today, I've been looking to have this guest on for a long time. He's all the way around the world in China, and that's what's going to make it so exciting. So what we're covering today is China's digital currency revolution, central bank digital currencies, fintech, and more. And when I say more, I mean a lot more. We're going to cover a lot today. You're really going to enjoy it. It features the before mentioned Richard Turrin, best-selling author of Cashless, a book that I loved, innovator and China fintech expert. Richard, welcome to the show.
Angelo, thank you so much for having me, and hello to everybody out there. So dive in, go ahead, hit me with whatever you want, and thank you for the kind words about my book. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you. I sure did. So my audience is already going to have a strong familiarity because we tend to be very concentrated, but maybe from a little bit more of a broad perspective, first question, and maybe if you want to go into a little bit of your background and what led you to Shanghai, why is it important for investors and Americans and really those around the world to understand kind of uniquely what is happening in China?
Yeah, that's the most important thing to get across to everybody, especially when I'm talking to a US-centric audience. And many people out there have the following preconceptions. And they're thinking that, well, China is far away, it doesn't matter. China traditionally copies innovation from the United States. And frankly, China's communist. So whatever happens there is so different that it's not really relevant to the US. And let's take those on head on right now. So yeah, China's far away. It really is. It's on the other side of the planet. The reality is in the digital world we live in, it's the same as being next door. The concept of physical distance no longer means anything. And the digital advances that China are making are every bit as applicable to the US as they are to China. So that goes to the next one. The concept that China copies. I understand that's almost like an internet meme and very much something that happened. We get it. It's there. China copied stuff, especially in the late 90s, early thousands. But what you see going on now in China is not that they're copying US. They're innovating on their own right and bringing technology to market that, frankly, we in the US and in the EU, pardon me, simply don't have. So when you look at WeChat now, putting a QR code, when you look at, I got it mixed up. When you look at Facebook, putting a QR code for Facebook Pay, right? They're borrowing that from WeChat in China. They didn't invent that, that's already existing. So you're looking at US companies copying China from China tech and adopting it to the US market. The third thing everybody worries about is China's communist. If it's communist, it has no relevance to what we're doing in the West, in the US. And the reality is China is this very odd hybrid, and it's more capitalistic right now than the US is in a lot of ways. But still, it's something that investors have to be aware of. So some investors are like, oh, it's just capitalistic like the United States. It's not. And anybody following, for example, the tech regulation of the last 3 or 4 months can see where China is a unique hybrid of capitalism and free markets and government control, where they don't want to let things get too out of hand. So the upshot, though, is that what happens in China is relevant for you. And most importantly, for our discussion today, ready? China is giving you a roadmap or a blueprint to a digital cashless future. They're cashless. They're there. And if you want to know what the US's cashless future is going to look like, what it's going to feel like, how it's going to change.
That is inevitable. That is inevitable.
Inevitable. And if you want to know what that is going to look like, go to China today, because we're cashless. I live it. So that's the upshot, and that's the important part. And I always try to get that out first. If you're resistant, go for it. China is important, and don't think that it's not.
And I think with my audience, whether they respect it or not, they do understand what you're saying, and they are intrigued by it. I think there's certain areas where China is miles ahead of us. And to some degree, this is a wake-up call. It might even be good. We understand that. In other areas, I think the US is in a very good position, or potentially other parts of the world. But let's talk a little bit about some areas where I think China does have an advantage relative to fintech. So you indirectly mentioned WeChat. I could think of Alibaba. I could think of Tencent, and we can name others. What I'm getting to is, what are they doing? I'm not going to quite say to disintermediate banks, but kind of. It's so unique.
Yes.
In their payment structures that they built in, that we don't really have anything quite like it here in the US. If you could go pretty deep into that.
Yeah, sure. Let's look at what I call the spark, the founding moment when things really took off. And that goes back to 2014. Okay, even a little bit before, because 2013 for some of the regulations. And basically, China had a problem. China had a huge unbanked population. You got 1.4 billion people. You can't put enough brick and mortar banks to service 1.4 billion people, especially in rural areas where people had nothing. So China, even before going with fintech, understood, going back in 2010, 11, 12, that putting in then 3G data into the rural areas was of critical importance to the government, because it allowed the government to reach out and to reach people. Places that were cut off suddenly got signal, and boy, they got data. So going up to 2014, what you saw was the government saying, well, how are we going to cure this unbanked population? And what they allowed to have happen was they allowed WeChat and Alibaba to build a payment platform that allowed you to use QR codes, little square boxes, right? There's one in my book over my shoulder. And they allowed you to make payment back and forth from individual to an individual. And at the same time, and this is where it really gets messy, the first private banks were licensed in China. And those licenses went to Alibaba, which is the equivalent of Amazon, WeChat, which is owned by parent Tencent, which is roughly like a Facebook or Twitter kind of company, but big one. And the other one was Baidu, and another one was another electronics store. But basically, 2014, banking licenses were given to big tech in China, the equivalents of Amazon, the equivalent of Facebook and Google. They got banking licenses, and they were allowed to provide some digital banking services across the net. And what they did through payment and banking is to, yes, make China cashless, but more importantly, they fundamentally changed people's relationship with money, and they changed people's relationship to their banks, into their financial institutions. And that all started with this big regulatory change in 2014.
I mean, that's huge. And that is an example of China being very creative and what I'm going to call the fintech community. And basically, they didn't get, what's the word I'm looking for? They didn't let their banking structure interfere with progress. So let's take that a little bit to the US. The banking system, and in most developed countries, is extremely close to the government, really kind of tied into the central banks. And it's very dominant in protecting what it has. It's not necessarily overly creative. So we have amazing tech companies here in the US, Apple, Google, Amazon. I could go on. And some of them have somewhat encroached into fintech and payment services, but the banking lobby and the structure of our government and regulation is so protective of the banks, it's not allowing some of this to flourish and create more competition.
Look, absolutely. So my throwaway line that I use all the time when I describe the regulatory in China, in regulatory changes in China, I always say this: the People's Bank of China, PBOC, allowed big tech to get banking licenses, and they did it at the expense of state-owned banks. Can you imagine the Fed allowing big tech to get a banking license or a financial service license of some form at the expense of the incumbent banking institutions? You can't even imagine it. It's like, it's impossible. And, and it's not just theoretical. The Office of Comptroller of Currency wanted to have a universal 50-state fintech financial services charter. And boy, the states of the incumbent banks in New York State and others came after the OCC and really hammered them. So yeah, look, I was a banker for 18 years, so forgive me if I say this. The banking monopoly is working in conjunction with regulators through lobbyists, through strong connections. And I get it. It's not good. The Fed should not try to disrupt banking in America. I get that. But at the same time, the relationship between the Fed and the incumbent banks is so close that they can give the appearance of working together to monopolize the market against innovation. Look, here's one for today. Ready? Up till the 1960s, we had what's called a postal banking service. And during World War II, you could buy savings bonds and you could deposit into the post office, postal savings. Just today, it was in the news, some of the senators are talking about bringing back postal services. The incumbent banks are going nuts on it. And, this is not unbanked population in America is not imaginary. We have 23% of Americans are underbanked or unbanked. So postal savings banks could save them money from going to check cashing, and could be, they're in bad neighborhoods, they're all over, and that could be a big help for financial inclusion in America. But the banking lobbies go against it immediately. So yeah, that concept of fintech regulation that disrupts, changes, or otherwise modernizes banking using the latest of digital services is not happening in the United States. And it did happen in China, and China went cashless as a result of it. So you've got a really interesting comparison between US and China and what they did and how they did it.
For sure. And if we would have our technology companies have some freedoms to what you're describing, I think we could have been every bit right up there with China. Now, some will argue, Angelo, the Facebooks and others of the world, they already impede on our privacy. That would probably make it even more so. We're going to get to some of that part a little bit later.
Yeah.
And my challenge with the post office, I hear you, and I'm pretty much half on board, half not, is it still is again, I'm a libertarian, it still is a government entity, which means, in my opinion, it'll be wickedly inefficient, and I rather have free enterprise be active in that. Let's jump a little bit ahead. Let's go a little bit to really the core tenet, I guess you could say, of your book. And my audience has heard me mention it many times, the rise of central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
I'm going to back up a little bit. Are central banks the most powerful entities in the world? Now, a little bit of a misleading question, because usually they're either owned or backed by the government. So theoretically, of course, that is yes. My concern, and I probably should first state to those that don't know what CBDCs are, central bank digital currencies, is central banks are already all powerful. If we lack privacy because it goes digital, which is inevitable, will they have a stranglehold that will last forever?
Okay, so that's really, there's a multi-layer question there.
Yes, yeah.
So yes, there's a lot of them in there. And let's take the first one. How powerful are central banks, and should they be that powerful? That's a legitimate question. And the answer is, right now, with zero interest rates, quantitative easing, central banks are essentially controlling and or financing our markets. And that's a scary part. I'm 60 now, and what I see, I grew up in a rather traditional classic. I'm a mathematician by trade, so I grew up with quantitative measures for everything. And all of the quantitative stuff that I learned in my youth is blown up. There's nothing out there that makes any sense to me if you use the traditional analysis. And part of this is due to quantitative easing and ultra low rates that are given to us by central banks. So yeah, central banks have more power than they ever have. Now, the question that you're asking is really fundamental. Do you want to give them more? In other words, do you want them to have a piece of retail finance, retail payment? And the answer is, in my view, yes, with caveats. And here's the most important thing I want to say to everybody out there. There's no model for what a central bank digital currency looks like. This week, we're going to hear from the Fed. They're going to publish some report about the digital dollar, America's CBDC, if they do it, if they don't, what it looks like. But the point is this. Central bank digital currencies are all individually constructed by the government that issues them. And in that build, in that design, they embody the ethics and principles and ethos of the country that issues them. So do not expect that China's is going to be like the US version of a central bank digital currency, or it's not going to be like Sweden's. So the following statement is patently false. Ready? All central bank digital currencies will spy on you and give the government unprecedented power over you, the citizen. Patently not true, because you have to look at the design before you can make that statement. So you can make central bank digital currencies completely anonymous, like cryptocurrency, if you wanted. Now, no central bank is logically going to do that. We get
Right.
that. But you could do it. So, you've got black and white, total control for the central bank, zero control for the central bank. A central bank digital currency will be somewhere in between there, and maybe more to one side if you're in China, and maybe more to the other side if you're in the United States. But it's not so black and white as people make it out to be, because you must look at the individual design. How's that?
You bring up a very good point, and I think you're being optimistic to think that even here in the US, it's going to be more towards personal freedoms. The more information the government has, and effectively, they always want control over their people, even here in the US. So I may disagree on the latter point. I think they will be intrusive. And let's jump, for those that may not be overly familiar with it. So we're taking the physical dollar or any currency of a country, and due to what China's doing, maybe due to cryptocurrencies, due to the advent of COVID-19, what's going on around the world, central bank digital currencies are not going to go away. I used to say, even 2 weeks ago, it'd be 10 or 15 years in the US before we have it, but we will have it. And now I'm laughing at that. That's ridiculous. It'll be 5 or 10 years. Or you might even say 3 or 4 years or sooner. So now what I could argue that it is, though, Richard, is it is because it's on a platform that I'm going to say the government is all seeing. They're issuing it. They control the rates. They could arguably do taxes out of it. It's wickedly efficient. It's almost beautiful, but it is programmable money, and it does allow the government incredible. To me, it takes away our privacy. But when I'm asked by these billionaire families, I'm like, there's nothing you can do about it. It's coming.
Okay, so let's talk about privacy, and let's talk about okay, first thing, ready? We live with the illusion of privacy. Most of us believe incorrectly that our cash flows, our banking, and all of this, our credit card, most of us are semi-cashless. We don't, we use credit cards for a lot of stuff, and we believe that the warning label that we read on Apple products that says Apple doesn't give your data away. We believe that. And the reality is, you're right, Apple doesn't sell your data, but everybody else, your bank, your acquiring bank, the merchant bank, everybody else along a very long chain
for sure.
involved in a credit card swipe, which is usually around 8 or 9 different companies. Each one of them is selling your data, even if Apple doesn't. So, and then we've got real interesting stuff going on right now. And so look, the American Families Act.
Yes.
This is at least the first proposal was for all transactions of $600 on all cash-bearing accounts would all have to report a flow in and out. I think it was monthly. So, you don't need a central bank digital currency to have the government intrude on your privacy. This is already happening through the tax system. So I think that the argument against CBDCs is made up, and only in the sense that there's plenty of, you don't need a digital currency to have the government spy on you. But okay, so I think I'm getting a little too far off point. So does central bank digital currency potentially give government a way to spy on your payment? And the answer is yes, provided that you use the word potentially. There are many designs for central bank digital currencies that do not automatically give government access to your spending. So what is commonly done is to have what's called a two-tier structure, where there is the central bank, and then there is your existing bank. And the digital currency goes from the central bank to your bank, and there's somebody as an intermediary in between. And then what they do is they anonymize the digital currency that you spend. So, and this is what happens in China. In China, we have a two-tier structure like this. And then we have the government, who has the ability to see the payment flows, but it doesn't know who is behind them. Only after the police or somebody says, hey, there's something highly irregular, we need to know what's going on here, only then are they allowed to say, okay, we've got some troubling activity here, let's connect it with a person to do more investigation or talk to them or find out. Now, look, I get it. We live in a world in the United States where we just found that all the FISA, the FBI information requests were found to be fraudulent. So what faith do you have in government to follow the rules that separate your payment from your identification? So you get into that problem of how much do you trust government? Not much or a lot. But theoretically, you can build these systems so that the government does not have immediate access to you and to your data. Absolutely technologically possible.
Correct. There is no doubt about that. But in reality, with governments being all encroaching here in the US, 105 years ago, the IRS and taxation is going to be for the short term. Come on. That didn't go away.
Right. That's perfect. Yeah. So I get it. So people, so look, what to tell people out there? Mm-hmm. And this is probably sad, and I apologize if this sounds overly negative, but I'm gonna hit you with it.
Go for it.
Please disagree with me. And the answer is, you have no privacy now. Your credit card data is mined. The IRS pays a large company called Palantir to search for tax cheats, and Palantir directly buys all of the credit card swipes in America. They have access to all this data. So the concept that you have secrets from the government as to where your money goes right now is, to me, that you are living in the illusion of privacy. So ready? The next step. You live in an illusion of privacy, meaning you have none, but you also live in the worst possible system, because you pay third-party institutions called banks large sums of money to transfer cash around for you. And you have neither privacy and you have high costs. A central bank digital currency world would allow you to have free and immediate cash payment anywhere in America without paying or waiting for a third party to have the check clear, to have them pay for the privilege of moving your money. And in the end, your privacy would roughly be equivalent. You'd have a gain in convenience and a gain in not paying vendors. With credit cards, we all pay. If you're a vendor or if you're a store or a shop, you're paying 3 to 5% for credit card swipes. That automatically disappears. So there's a net positive for it, and frankly, the change in privacy is actually minuscule if you really want to objectively look at how little privacy you have today. That's sad, and please disagree with me. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I would say I'm probably 80% on board in terms of the reality of what you're saying. That does bring up, I guess you could say, another question. You actually hinted at it a couple of minutes ago. There are various ways to do a central bank digital currency and various ways to roll it out. Let me know which variation I forgot from that part of your book they're doing in China. There is a way to keep the current banking system because it employs people. It's politically powerful, and maybe the government doesn't want to directly deal with, in your case in China, with billions of consumers. So is there a role for traditional banks in a central bank digital currency world?
Look, absolutely. And that's a great question. And let's hammer this. My friends, in fact, there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal about the dangers of a digital dollar. It was about 48 hours ago now. The danger of the digital dollar. And it's always the same stuff. And you'll see these arguments come up. Here, ready? Argument number one. A digital dollar or a central bank digital currency will disrupt the banking system. And that's patently false. China and other countries are looking at what are called a two-tier central bank digital currency. Forget about CBDC. Cash. Cash is printed at the Fed. It's brought in trucks to your bank. You get it from your bank if you want cash by going to an ATM, right? So there are two tiers. You don't go to the central bank to get your money, right? And it's the same thing with digital currency. So what they will use is a two-tier system that causes the least amount of disruption possible to banks. So you will still likely need a bank account. You will still use your bank for service. It's just that you will no longer need to pay your bank to send money to somebody. And you will no longer write checks, which is a good thing. Okay, so that's number one. The concept of destabilizing the banking system is flat out bunk. No country wants to blow up their bank system. It's too valuable. There's too much good in what banking does. I was a banker. I grant that. I don't hate banks, and no central bank is going to blow them up. That's why you will see many countries copy this model that China did with two tiers. And that's not unique to China. It's been in the research for a long time. It follows how we use cash.
Could I make the argument that small countries may look to go more direct with their central banks?
Great comment. And you read my book. So if you're an island nation, right? If you're the Bahamas, which is the first issuer of a central bank digital currency on the planet, if you're a tiny group of islands, you can give every citizen a bank account at the central bank because there's only 20,000 people. And for a digital world, that's nothing. You know what I mean? So yeah, small countries can do direct. They don't kill the banks. It's okay. So so it's different with India, China, 1.4 billion people in China. You can't give, the central bank is in no way prepared to make 1.4 billion bank accounts for people on central bank systems. Not going to happen, right? So that's what you have to look at. One more thing,
Sure.
real quickly, and this is an easy one. And this is just funny, okay? Now think about this for a moment. You're going to hear this all the time. Central bank digital currencies, wait for it, may create bank runs. Oh, come on, folks. So the same people who give central bank digital currency mystical digital powers cannot imagine that there's an off switch or that there's some way to handle people taking all their money out. So look, if there's a central bank digital currency in your country, in the United States, it will likely be like your credit card, where you have a limit. You can't just take $10 million out of the bank in central bank digital currency, push it somewhere else overnight. You know what I mean? So this concept that there's going to be a bank run is manageable by design, has been managed by China. They're going to have limits on how much you can move around. And, again, it's this disconnect. It's not going to happen. So the common things, disruption of the banking system, bank runs, my flat out answer is that's all BS. And the people who write that are somehow disconnecting from what's already happening and been built in the world here in China.
More so on the macro level, we'll jump into this micro in probably about 20 to 30 minutes. But what could, or arguably could be a threat to governments and banking institutions, and I could argue central bank digital currencies potentially still could be to banks and bypassing them, but ignore my snide comment for a second. I will say that truly decentralized, and we may jump into that later, but like Bitcoin and generally DeFi, decentralized finance, are potentially threats to governments and banks. Do you agree or not?
Yes and no. Okay, so look, I would agree with this, that decentralized anonymous payment without control is hated, loathed by every government in the planet right now, whether it's China, India, the United States. Look, every central bank, every government believes that its primary mission after fielding an army to defend the country's next goal is to pay the army, and for that they need money and they need a central bank, or they need the monetary system. So the concept of non-governmental money, I think, is real. It's another issue, but every government loathes it, so therefore they will try to control it in as much as they can. Now, DeFi is an interesting one because everybody right now associates DeFi only with cryptocurrency. But I've started to see the first articles out on them. I should write one myself because I'll be early on in this. Is a central bank digital currency can also be used on a DeFi platform, which means an autonomous company, something that is pre-programmed, a small company that is pre-programmed itself. The company itself is software. Now, where can you imagine that? If you have a central bank digital currency, you can imagine the most basic bank account, which is often called narrow banking, going into a DeFi platform. There's no reason why it can't. It's so simple. It's how much money is in your bank account and how much money is not in your bank account. A Visa card as a debit card or some other basic stuff. It's really well within the scope to be provided by a DeFi company today, right now. We got to have the central bank digital currency first, but in a couple of years after the CBDC is launched, you'll see DeFi put together with CBDC.
Because the next 52 minutes of our remaining time may fly by, and I do want to jump into some of the issues that you described. What I will say about Bitcoin, and I've been an advocate and fan, I am definitely not a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm much more diverse in the ecosystem. But I will say among the cryptocurrencies, not only is it an early adopter, the most brand name, and likely, and I still use that with a little bit of hesitancy, likely truly decentralized. And yes, I agree. In America, unlike China, because it's freedom of speech and code, it theoretically can't be banned. But the people that are extreme advocates to think that the government can have some impact on the on and off ramps on taxation, you're kidding yourselves. Now, I could argue the US doesn't want to fall behind. They want to work hand in hand. It supports many people. Some US senators like Cynthia Lummis are advocates and holders of Bitcoin. But this is a tenuous relationship with the US government and other governments. But to think that at minimum, the US government's not going to want to profit by doing a property tax like they do on real estate, I think you're just kidding yourself. This is likely inevitable. Do you agree, Richard?
Oh, look, absolutely. And I say all the time that the gap, they're Bitcoin maximalists, and they're over here on the left or my left, and the CBDC people are over here. And, you know, the crypto is free and let it run wild. That's dead. That ain't going anywhere anymore. And the regulations that will be put on crypto will close the gap with central bank digital currency. In other words, if you're going to use crypto, God bless you. I like it. I'm like you. I like all things. In fact, I always say we will all have digital wallets in the future that will have
100%.
They're going to have digital currency, as in central bank digital currency. They're going to have crypto in them. They're going to have stable coins. You'll pick the money you want to use according to what you want to do with it. And maybe you'll even go for a Visa card because you get miles or something, you know, so you'll pick it, but you'll pay how you want.
Yeah, and we will dive into some more on crypto and DeFi and even NFTs a little bit later. Let me jump into something that I should have brought up when we were talking maybe earlier on in the conversation. There is an American company that everyone's familiar with in tech, Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook. That did try something I think very unique and creative, almost kudos to them. Whether I would have liked it or not, it's a different story. And that's the Libra and Diem. Boy, that was shot down awful quick. That was an absolute threat to governments and the banking system.
Yeah, look, let's go into it real quickly, because I will try to make my answers punchier because I know you got a long list and I'm a talker. So real quickly, Libra. The original concept of Libra as a multi-currency stable coin for use across the globe is long dead. It has been replaced by something called Diem. And while I'm no big fan of Facebook, I'm really not, you know, look, we all have issues right now with data and Facebook. We know it's been in the newspapers a lot in recent days. I give them a tremendous amount of credit for working through the Diem stablecoin, which is likely to be the first big corporate stablecoin in America. And if so, they will have a big hit on their hands. And I give them a lot of credit for that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm agreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah. So I give them a lot of credit for it. They really they spent a lot of money and stuck through. Now, just to make something clear here to folks, there's no gamble for them to do this. They know that the business model of connecting social media with payment is on fire. And why do they know that? Because they know what WeChat does in China. And Mark Zuckerberg, you can go Google it. Mark Zuckerberg has been a big fan of WeChat, and he's got quotes that basically say, gee, before I started using it, I thought it was just like WhatsApp or whatever. But now that I'm using it, I see what you can do in China. It's mind blowing to me. So he knows where he wants to go, which is why he's willing to invest. But I think that we're going to have Silvergate Bank, which is the sponsor for Diem coin, and I think it's going to come. I think we're going to see it within the next 6 months. They've already announced that the wallets are ready to go.
Right.
And that's going to be the first real disruptor. And I have to say, the banks and the financial system are still not ready for it. They're sleeping.
Oh, 100%.
They just, look, one of the reasons, let's really get to the heart of this. Nobody really likes banks. We don't like, and even if we like our bank, nobody likes paying to move money around. Nobody likes checks. Nobody likes this means that we had since it's really technology out of the late 80s, early 90s that we're stuck with for moving money.
I
So a
think
lot
you
of the
said,
crypto guys, crypto is pushed by people who just hate dealing with the banking system. So once DM comes out and people have another way, and even if they loathe Facebook, just for the sheer ease of moving money around, they'll use it. So, you know.
no doubt about it. I think in your book, I read a quote from Bill Gates. I'm going to mess it up a little bit. The world needs banking. It doesn't need banks.
Yeah, that's classic. And, and Jack Ma said had a similar quote here for China. So, so we have to take a look at what's the underlying causation of the push for people to use crypto, the push for people to especially do cross-border transfers with things like US dollar tether or stable coins. And, it's a dislike of the banking system and wait for it, it's poor service in the banking system. It's developing countries that don't have access to the US banking system because of fears of money laundering, even if they're honest people. So people go to what they want, what they can use. And when we get more options for how to move money that do not include a normal bank, I think it's going to be like opening the floodgates, and the banks and the people working in them and managing them do not have a sense of that. And I was working in IBM down in Singapore up to about 3 years ago, and I lived it, and I saw how banks just don't get it. They just sort of assume you're going to be there forever, and that's not a good assumption to make.
And that's Singapore, a country that's very modern, tech savvy, and you think would be a little bit ahead of the curve. And in some ways they are, but that is, no matter what country you go to, that is a common theme in banking. What I will say here in the US is I think in the world of crypto and DeFi, and very sneaky and very quietly, but Goldman and JP Morgan have been rather active players. And again, to much of it, kudos to them to being a little bit ahead of the curve. Actually, indirectly on that note, are China and the USA, I'm going to lump them both together. Are China and the USA the world's leaders in misdirects?
Look, that's a great, really, really great question. And yeah, there's a real conflict brewing right now between the US and China. And my message to everyone out there who's listening is that please disbelieve much of what you're reading right now. Virtually every article that you read in China, and anybody who connects with me on LinkedIn, I write about this every day, we're being misdirected, all right, in the sense that China is cast as this black and white totalitarian state of infinite control that's the black side, and the white side is people who are simply compliant. And that black and white two-dimensional paper cutout caricature is sort of how a lot of the Western newspapers and a lot of what you consume and read about China, it's how it's cast. And it's not so black and white. There's a lot of gray here. And there's a lot, when you talk about technology, there's a lot of innovation. So we just came off a period, I understand, that was painful for a lot of family offices and a lot of investors, and that was the tech regulation in China. And I read the newspaper headlines, and they're all the same. China is murdering tech. AI is destroyed. China is crushing its tech companies. And yes, there is certainly a big investor impact to what happened to the tech regulation in China, no question about it. But China has greater penetration of tech into society than the US does. And the reality is, if you look at a lot of what they were doing, and you went not to the main newspapers, but into the tech journals, and you start to see it, a week goes by, And tech analysts start to saying, hey, China is now ahead of us in regulation for artificial intelligence. China maybe had a few good ideas in there. And, rather than this China is wrong, China, we know better, and China is killing big tech, you really have to look more nuanced and dig a little deeper. And what you'll see is a lot of the things they're doing is actually setting up big tech to be a better steward or a better player in society, but long term will make big tech and tech companies even more important and make tech more important within China. They're handling the questions that we're not handling, which we see right now. Facebook, how much data do they have? What are they doing with it? Nobody's dealing with it. Now, I know that China's method of dealing with it may not be the same as the United States. I get that. But some of the ideas they have are actually quite compelling, quite good, and we should look at them. So yeah, look beyond the black and white headlines and look for the gray.
We'll jump into another core topic, then we'll probably go 10 questions lightning round to kind of take it to the home stretch. But I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, and my audience is interested in how I pronounce it, Evergrande, there in China. So what I would like to do is I would like to read a comment. Unfortunately, I didn't reference where I got it from, so sorry. And it is very hard hitting. Then I would like you to take it from there. Please let me read it. The Chinese are not only looking at what's inside the four walls of Evergrande and ignoring the fact that their entire property and financial system is on the verge of a world-class historic crack-up. But here's the real problem, according to the author. The damage will not be confined to Evergrande. It will spread quickly to counterparties of Evergrande, including other developers and banks. This unprecedented combination of a financial crisis and communist indifference could result in a full-blown contagion that could emerge as a crisis in the US and Europe sooner rather than later. That's a lot there. Go for it.
Sure. Okay. So let's, to say that the Chinese government is indifferent with regard to the real estate issue is absurd at face. The Chinese government has been trying to deflate a real estate bubble for quite a long time, and it have passed numerous regulations, some of them that have failed horribly and others that have worked a little bit. So that the government is indifferent is bull, just not happening. They're really on this. That Evergrande is a large company that will fail, and that will have knock-on effects to counterparties. Oh, you can bet that's true.
Yep.
No argument. Nobody's arguing that. That's in the papers every day. Now, what really is behind this is, will this cause a destabilization of China and or the banking system? And the answer is no. What they're doing already is they're parsing Evergrande up, they're selling off the bits, they're figuring out what to do with it, and they're assigning it some parts to certain banks, other parts to other banks, and it's going to be absorbed into a far larger system. Is this good for China? No. Is this a problem? Yes. Is this a manageable problem? Without question. Is it unique to China? Well, it is a bubble. It is a problem to be fixed. It is not a bubble that's popped. Do we have examples of bubbles in other parts of the world, including US and other places? Yes. They're expensive to fix, but I don't see this as, I just don't see this as causing a massive crisis in China, and it will be contained.
Well, then I have a part two question for that.
Please.
Looking at the US back in 2007 and 8, could I say that, I'm trying to give an analogy, it may be a bad one, but is Evergrande their version of a Bear Stearns? And is there a Lehman Brothers and AIG lurking that we don't know about yet?
That's a great question. So the answer to that is, I don't believe so. Look, Evergrande was a really badly run company. They had a lot of problems. Are there other badly run property companies in China? Yes. Are they as big? No. Um, I would be, I don't want to be flippant and say it's all going to work out. Everything is going to be fine. But you know what? It's all going to work out. Everything is going to be fine. It does not, look, it does not signal a collapse in the property market in China. People don't have anywhere else to put their money. Capital markets are developing here. There are no alternatives. China has a lot of cash and doesn't know where to put it. They put it in property. That's led to a run-up. But to assume that this is the prelude to a crash in real estate and or banking and or other is overstating. Look, China, we saw that when things went bad in 2007 and 8, the Fed did what? It forced marriages, it moved money around, it forced bailouts, it said, hey, AIG, pay off Goldman Sachs, right? We didn't like it, but they did it. If anybody can make marriages that will fix and or ameliorate a bad situation, it's the Chinese government. They control, they're better at fixing and making new marriages than the Fed ever would dream of being, right? That's what they do all the time. They're good at it. So I don't see this as disaster. It's not good. Kids, you're not in Kansas anymore. It's China. It has unique things that are part of being a developing nation. But indifferent, if I would object to anything in that statement, it was the concept of indifference. They are not indifferent.
I have a series of questions. We'll perhaps go a little more lightning round. And we do have about 35 minutes, so we have a fair amount of time.
I'll be fast. I'll try.
We'll both try because it could be a little hard for both of us. And that's cool. We like to expand our thoughts. This one I got from one of my members. It's hard hitting, but I think it's fair for me to ask. And it relates a little bit to maybe the Evergrande that I just built into. Is the Chinese economy basically debt-driven Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, no, that's not hard hitting. I hear that all the time. That's normal. No, you can believe that if you want. Hey, look, if you think China is a debt-driven Ponzi scheme, look at the US. I mean, come on, look at your own home. Look, the reality is China funds most of its internal development through debt. But that debt is run within the Chinese system, and very little of it is financed offshore, unlike the US, where we finance offshore. So the answer is that is patently absurd. Come here and see the growth. Come here and see what's happening. Come and see the betterment of people's lives, how the growth of the middle class. Come see what 6% annual growth looks like, and no, you would not have that. You would not have that perception. Is there debt here? Certainly, but the concept of a debt-fueled Ponzi scheme, no. And there's plenty of other people like greats Ray Dalio who would reject that notion as well.
I think we kind of answer this question to a degree in the first two questions when we started, but I'll reframe it in a simpler way. Is China the world's incubator for innovation and disruptive technologies?
Yes, flat out. Look, guys, I know Silicon Valley has a lot to offer, and I'm not saying that the US or EU are not innovating, but you have to really face the facts. And the facts are that China's graduating something like 1 million STEM graduates every year, and you're graduating in the United States, a couple 100K. This massive amount of young people who are all going into science and technology are fundamentally changing China. And China is fundamentally using them exactly the same way. Now, I'm old. China today feels like 1967 Cold War America, where everybody was supposed to be an engineer. That was me. So that we could make rocket ships and other stuff so that we could fuel the race to the moon, right? But that's what China feels like today. There is a national imperative to build science, technology, and innovate. And man, it's going to be very hard for the US to, it's not something that you can build back better. You got to graduate these people. It takes a decade.
Very good points. Another question, and we could go down a deep rabbit hole, which we may do at a future podcast on it, but let's go a little bit more on the macro level. If China is such an innovator, why did they ban Bitcoin mining? And is this a misdirect?
It's in a misdirect. Look, China banned Bitcoin mining for two big reasons. All right. And they are simple. Bitcoin has two uses in China and only two uses. You may not buy a cup of coffee in China with Bitcoin. China, since 1949 and the revolution ended, had a policy. There's one money in China. That's the renminbi or the Chinese yuan. That's it. That's all that's ever been used here. Nobody, except for one coffee shop in Beijing, there's a video that exists of somebody buying a coffee using Bitcoin. You can't use it for anything. So it has two uses. Money laundering, which means breaking the money transfer sanctions, and ready, speculation, both of which are deemed unacceptable by the Chinese government.
How about a store of value?
And buy what? And do what with it? So you see, so the problem is, if you want to just store value, which is according to the Chinese government, that would fall into the speculative area. They are non-committal to speculation in Bitcoin and would prefer to guide that market into equity markets and into normal investment markets in China. It's taking away capital that should be deployed within the country that supports, in their words, the quote, real economy.
I hear you, and I could argue from the US perspective, and maybe we're trending somewhat in that direction, although giving so-called a capitalist society, I hinted at it earlier, they could control arguably taxation and the on and off ramps, but theoretically via freedom of speech and be an open source code. And the fact that it now has become pretty ingrained here in the US, a quote unquote ban is unlikely to happen. Do you think that now part of the challenges people had before this with Bitcoin was they felt too many miners were in China and arguably controlling hash power? And let's not get too deep into the technical weeds that will bore people, but that has now went to the US, to Pakistan, to other countries, and did cause a hit to Bitcoin going back a couple of months ago, but it seems like it has recovered. It's been a great couple of days broadly in crypto. Sure. Let me ask a different variation of that question. Maybe it gets a chuckle and a laugh, and it always gets me in trouble with the Bitcoin maximalist, by the way. Do you think that China believes that possibly the creation or control of Bitcoin was by the US government, the NSA?
I can add absolutely nothing to that. I have no clue. I have never seen an announcement from the PBOC or anyone in government who has speculated or has come out with anything about US control of Bitcoin. Sorry, I got nothing for you on that one. At least from what I've seen. Maybe if somebody knows different, please. But I read this stuff all day long.
Are there any disadvantages to a central bank digital currency?
Sure. Look, the biggest issue that people have with central bank digital currency is privacy, and we covered that a little bit before.
Right.
And my advice to people is as follows: that the cashless future, the way that you will change, the way going cashless will change your relationship with money, is a fundamentally good thing, in that the privacy issues are real, but can be adequately managed so that, ready? Now here's the caveat. The privacy you get will be the same or better, slightly better than what you've got now. Now that's tricky because I told you that I wasn't too thrilled with the amount of privacy you got now. But I think you can do better than what we've got now, and you can expect to do better than what we've got now with credit cards and other payment means. So yeah, that's the big drawback. If it wasn't for that, everything about a CBDC is great. Let's face it. I mean, we all want to pay for free. We all want it to be immediate. It's good.
What are the potential unintended consequences of AI, blockchain, and quantum computing?
Yeah. So that's a really wonderful question. And there are three there. So AI, look, I don't subscribe to look, I used to work in AI. AI is still remarkably stupid. The concept that AI is going to somehow take over and manage the world is we've got a long way to go before you get into that general intelligence. So I don't buy into that. The one that I think is the blockchain, blockchain, it was AI, blockchain, and quantum, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So blockchain is fun. Now look, any of you who are sort of thinking, well, look, blockchain was supposed to change the world in 2016 and 17 when it first launched. You're right, it was. It's going to take a while, but blockchain will be adopted, and blockchain will change our world. And if you want to see how that is happening, I want you to look at blockchain in China, where they're running certain government services on blockchain. Certain documents from the government back and forth are now on blockchain, and it's going to be really basic stuff. Don't look for it to like revolutionize everything tomorrow, but your house deed, your marriage certificates, all that stuff is going to go on blockchain. It's going to be great. If you want to see how that's going to work, China is running the world's largest blockchain, and it is a presidential decree to use it and to use blockchain. And now we get into quantum, and all the Bitcoin maximalists should be afraid, because once you start getting into the quantum realm, the encryptions that we all use in most of the standard Bitcoin or crypto world may become less meaningful. And we don't know how that's going to play out yet, but there is a whole group of people who are already looking at quantum security and what you need, what's the next level of security that you need when computers are finally able to crack what we consider secure networks today. And that's, these are big issues, and they are the disruption to come.
No doubt about it. And now, yes, there could be quantum defenses and strategies that counteract some of that. And what I'll say is, broadly, Bitcoin and crypto make up an ultra tiny percentage that is relatively complex to crack. The traditional banks and traditional financial system is wickedly behind the times, much bigger, and probably much, much more lower hanging fruit. But that probably is a pretty deep cyber discussion we could have.
No, your assessment is 200% on target. If you've got a quantum computer and you're a criminal and it's at your disposal, why bother with crypto when you can just hack a bank, right?
I mean, basically, yes. Now, we could get into bearer asset, non-bearer asset, what would be reimbursed, but the criminals just want to make money and make money quick. Why has China limited the citizens' ability to play video games? I had a hard time keeping a straight face.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because the limits really only apply to online games. So the idea was that children are playing games online too frequently. So they put limits on it for the kids. And I don't have kids, so it's a little hard for me to wrap my hands around, I admit. But the concept is that if you're not playing games, you'll be doing something else. That is, if you're not playing games and you're limited to playing games on your cell phone, you'll do something else societally beneficial and constructive. In reality, you'll play the game on the cell phone, and then you'll just go to your Xbox and play the game, whatever game there. So I'm not sure I understand it in its full. But remember, this is one of the things that makes society, China unique. China has a strong, and this is hard for people to get, it has a strong push to make society better and to try to make people better. And, and I know that it comes out in weird ways like this, and I know that it's not particularly attractive, but some of the stuff is not necessarily all that bad. So the schools were the other one that were in the news recently, the school programs, which is
Yes.
welcomed by many people in China because the school systems had become, the private school systems had gotten out of control. But that's another issue.
Well, actually, that was going to be one of my questions.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
just the lightning answer on it. So 2 minutes, talk a little bit about it.
Real quickly, the schools. Basically, China is still a communist socialist country, and it got out of control so that those with money could afford and buy post-school educational programs that would prep the kids and allow them to get into better schools and give them opportunities that poor kids didn't have. So the system was being gamed by these post-educational programs, and there was problems where the after-school programs were buying the best teachers out of the public schools.
Yes.
So so it was really disruptive to the entire educational system, and the government came along and said, to hell with this, we're not dealing with it anymore, we're closing it down. And yeah, I get that they could probably communicate more effectively to what their plans are so that it doesn't crash markets across the planet. I get that, but that's China, and they take very bold moves and they don't mess around. If they have something that bugs them and they think that the world, that China can be better, they'll change it. And that's what they did with tech, and that's also what they did with schools, and to a certain degree with monitoring, limiting kids to 40 minutes of game time. It's not Kansas. It is different in how it approaches stuff. But try to see through the China's crazy, China's wrong, China doesn't know what it's doing, and look more deeply. And maybe somewhere you'll see some kernels of, okay, maybe it's not all out of whack.
Is the Chinese crackdown on Alibaba and Financial and Didi a way to nationalize those companies?
Absolutely not. Basically, I love Ant. There's no company in China that I love more than Ant Group. Ant Group is a great company. It controlled at one point 10 to 12% of all of the personal loans in the country of China, and had no regulatory background, no reserves or anything to back it up. So it's a tremendously successful company. It made Fintech, the Fintech that you will use in America. If you just studied one company, and that was Ant, you will learn what the digital future will be like in the US.
Very good.
They're that good. They're that good.
And your book
now
certainly spoke about that.
Yeah, they're that good. But the thing is, though, that these companies had gone from startups to aggressive tech companies to too big to fail. They became too big to fail institutions. So when DD, which is the equivalent of Uber, has 95% of the ride sharing market in all of China, is that good for society? Especially when they do it by anti-competitive pricing that prices the smaller guys out of the business. So there's real issues, and China, the government, has no desire to nationalize Ant, has no desire to nationalize Didi, but they do want to end anti-monopolistic practices, and they are not shy. And by the way, there was an America that wasn't so shy either when it slammed the Bell telephone system. So, China learned a lot of stuff from the US, and, so, so we as a nation in the US were once far more aggressive in potentially pursuing antitrust than we are now when we look at antitrust cases against Google, which is the picture of antitrust, but nobody can touch it. It seems like it's an untouchable monopoly.
Is 996 the Chinese secret weapon? For those that don't know what that is, 99 means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And that would be a short work day, 12 hours and 6 days a week. Do they simply work really hard?
Yes and no. So the 996 really was the guys who were working for startups and the tech industry. Most people who work for a normal non-tech company do not work that hard, okay? But the answer is the secret Look, it's no. So the answer is no. 996 is not the secret. 996 is perhaps one of the reasons why China's tech scene developed so fast, but that's limited to the tech area. And it changes and has gone at a speed that people in the West cannot conceive of. And that in tech is due to 996, yes. The overall economy and what's happening here in general is not due to 996, but it is due to a tremendous practicality that older listeners will appreciate if I say this. It was almost like the World War II generation in the late 50s and in the 60s, which I remember well. And people are freaking practical and they just get down and they do stuff. That part is mind-blowing. You got a job to do, people bang it out. It's not always perfect. It's not always, artistic, but there's a lot of people who really just bang out their work and they do it consistently and they get stuff done. And boy, that's something that my father's generation that I can relate to because I knew them well because I'm older. And I remember his cronies and his buddies, and they just got a lot of stuff done.
It's funny that you used the word crony because that's coming up in my next question, which
there you go. Okay.
What role does cronyism play in the success of Chinese companies?
That's a really interesting question and one that I have not studied in depth. I would be lying to you if I told you it didn't matter. Yes, it matters. Yes, cronyism and good ties with regional party officials or regional governments are very important to Chinese companies, and more so now than ever, given tech crackdowns and the concept that companies have to contribute to what is called common prosperity. So yes, those relationships are very important. They have been historically important, and to make light of them would be inaccurate. Now, to say the success of an independent company like Ant or Alibaba or Tencent or DD was based solely on good relationships and cronyism with government is a stretch and is not accurate. So it's this very delicate balance between the two. But sure, it's China. You cannot divorce your a successful corporation from good relationship with local authorities.
Very fair. We'll go back in our final 10 minutes or so to maybe some points to some degree I might have brought up earlier. And no, we're not going to have time to do a 90-minute session on crypto, DeFi, and broadly the digital asset ecosystem. My audience probably hears that enough for me anyway. But if I had to make some comments, it is a little bit the Wild Wild West. And there is, you could argue, decentralization via Bitcoin and some other platforms in crypto. But even if you look at the Solanas, the EOSs, I mean, really, are they really quote unquote decentralized? They appear to be wonderful companies with great investment opportunity. Go for it. My audience knows I've been a big advocate and I've been very active, and lately looking to get extremely active in NFTs. It's a wonderful nirvana for those around the world to connect, communicate, to be creatives. And there's just so much I'm so excited about. I have a big butt coming up though, Richard, you probably feel it. And that would be relative to the butt. Yes. I mean, and we hinted at this earlier. Yeah, some of this could escape because it may be too small government core interest. And yes, you could have a chance to be decentralized, but to think that even here in the US, let alone in a communist country, that it's just going to be allowed to go on and flourish, to disrupt the banking and government system and not have anything done about it, at minimum to on and off ramps. And even looking at the metaverse and things like that, you may have freedoms for the next couple of years, which are incredible. And I agree with them. But to think that looking 5 or 10 years out, that these aren't going to be at least somewhat centralized, if not major control by tech companies and governments, I think it's just foolish not to think that. But in the meantime, love it and make a lot of money. I agree.
Yeah, look, as far as NFTs go, and this is an entire new world, and nobody knows how to regulate it, but they will. So the concept that this is going to be the Wild West forever or for a very long time is inaccurate. And yes, you'll pay taxes on it. And yeah, the off and on ramps will be under control. Yeah, that's happening. I don't look, this gets to the whole issue is, do you believe the government should control your money? And that's sort of the bigger issue at stake with all this. And if you like airports and roads, the answer is, yeah, they got to have some control over it because nobody will pay taxes without it. So, what to do? But I agree. It's the NFTs in particular are the Wild West right now. And although I'm not convinced that all of the high prices are real. I think there's a lot of shady dealings going on there right now, but that's another issue.
In terms of, I wish we could do an hour or two on this subject alone, but we'll give it 2 minutes. I've been a big advocate of my family's looking at a country like Switzerland, not only in terms of possible residency, citizenship, a satellite family office, owning banking institutions. I just look at the number of the world's most powerful and influential people, many of them off the grid, that have one of what I just described, specifically in Basel, Switzerland, but often in Switzerland. And then we get into the issue of, is it still the king of banking? And how about the Bank of International Settlements? Is that the central bank, central bankers? Is Switzerland still discreetly the world's most powerful, not only banking system, could I even go with the word country?
Yeah, it's very interesting because Switzerland has been a big crypto adopter and blockchain adopter. So
absolutely.
One of the things I give them credit for is that between their pro blockchain, pro crypto, and the BIS, which is really taking the lead for designing central bank digital currency systems, they've got an innovation team in Hong Kong and Singapore that are doing really great work. So I think Switzerland is a great location. I have nothing but good things to say about it. And it seems that they have done a lot to ensure that they remain relevant as we go into this cashless digital world. And in fact, I think that they're going to come out of this or enter this digital period a leader. So I give them credit. They're well set. They're well set up. They're doing very well. In fact, it's funny. I have a bunch of friends who are in Switzerland, and crypto. They're just doing tremendous things over there.
Well, I mean, let's see what I could do in our final 6-7 minutes with some perhaps Angelo crazy stuff, as some people refer to it.
Go ahead, hit me with it.
I'm going to ask you kind of an unfair question because it's going to be looking at American politics, looking out in the future. Do you think the US is trending towards, when you look at Generation Z, the millennials, when you look at people not feeling like they have a future or a purpose, to someone like an AOC, who effectively is a socialist? I'd love to have her on the show. She's not accepted yet, but possibly in, I don't know, 4, 8, 10, 12 years, she's still young, becoming president. And when you look at incredibly high taxes and changing much of the structure here in the US, do you think the US could, looking, let's even call it 10 to 30 years out, be trending towards socialism, if not even communism?
Okay, communism, no. I don't think anybody's crazy enough. Look, China isn't communist, despite the name of the actual party. So, traditional textbook communism where the government controls stuff, I can't see that ever happening in the US. I can't see it happening in China. But I think that the issue is that young people are disaffected. And that concept that the traditional system will provide is to be trusted, and we will have faith in that. I think that those fundamental core values have been shaken, so that young people will be pro universal health care, pro universal basic income. I, you know, I think that's a given. So I don't think that I don't think that in 20 or 30 years, the time frame that you're looking at, things that we see as socialism, disaster, to be avoided at all costs, I think they're going to be pretty normal. It's pretty hard to really justify a system where people can't afford to go to the hospital. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
so, you know, so I understand that these systems may be imperfect, just like your argument about the post office, it's not perfect. But I think that as America's gap between rich and poor continues to grow, that unless these systems come into place, how are you going to keep it all together? That's sort of the issue. If you continue to have this gap grow between rich and poor, and you don't provide basic services, what are you going to get?
A question from one of our participants. I think it's an interesting one, meaning one of our live attendees. Does the media use the racist bias of Americans to blame China for things in order to make the US agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you please give me a show on that? And anybody listening, go look at my LinkedIn yesterday. I wrote an article on this, and the answer is, I'm sorry to say this, and I apologize, but there is a tremendous amount of racism toward China in the media. There is the assumption that China cannot do, the assumption that China doesn't know. And much of this is not based on what people are thinking today, but what people think historically for 100 years ago about what China was about and who Chinese are about, and that Chinese people can't do. And you see that, I see it all the time, and it is a major problem. And it is used as follows. Look, China is being othered. They're turned into another person in an us versus them competition. And part of that is so that people do not focus on the problems that the US has to deal with. And I know that's harsh. I wish I had more time for it. But the best trick that a magician can do is to take your eye off of the pen in the right hand so you don't see it. And the best way to do that is to slam China. Look, aren't you happy you don't live in China? It's really bad over there. And if you continue to pound that in, people will think they got it pretty good. Well, I live in a city with 25 million people and I have no crime. Streets are perfectly clean and things are pretty good. So my point is to say, it is a form of distraction to promote an agenda. And I'm sorry, I wish I had more time to go into that.
Is Tether exposed to Chinese commercial paper?
Couldn't tell you. Nobody knows. My hunch is that they are, because I think these guys were trying to juice returns. I don't, and if you looked at their disclaimer, it was that they were not connected to Evergrande, for example, exactly, but there's lots of other issuers in there. So I think they are. I think Tether is the biggest single risk to the cryptocurrency world right now.
That is a very bold statement, and I'm not sure that I disagree with you.
Okay, I'll take it one just to make it clear. I don't think crypto is a Ponzi scheme in totality. I think Tether is a Ponzi scheme, but because Tether is connected to everything else, it has the real risk of bringing the whole damn house of cards down, and that's a problem. And I posted on Twitter repeatedly, Tether worth 50 cents on the dollar at best. I'm sure Tether all day long, but that's another issue.
Well, Richard, you gave me a couple of good sound bites to run with. Thank you.
Go ahead. You want some more?
Well, I did have some that came in via my text. I guess they wanted to keep it off the grid of the Zoom, and it's a little
please.
direct. and we'll just get right to it. The person basically said, Richard, do you believe in personal freedoms?
Absolutely.
And
Look,
their part two, because it's going to relate to your comment,
sure.
is do you believe in communism?
No, nobody believes in communism. People in China don't believe in communism. I mean, look, let me take that really, really quickly. Your perception, the person asking that, is basically you perceive that people in China are unfree. And my answer to you is that people in China live their lives almost identically to the way that you live your life in the United States. They travel, they go abroad, they do stuff. Modern China is pretty much normal, and that's the way it is. So your perception that people are, look, this is the sad part. You can go ahead. Your perception that you were imbued with particular freedoms in the United States that do not exist anywhere else, and that people in China are enslaved, is flat out wrong. And that doesn't mean that I'm a communist, because China is blatantly not communist. China is more capitalist than the United States is right now. And that's the amazing thing. You'd have to come here and live here for a while to see. But it is not what you were thinking. And because I like China and because I live here, that certainly does not make me a communist, nor does it necessarily make me the communist light socialist version. I'm still a capitalist, and I see capitalism every day when I walk out the streets here.
Excellent, Richard. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation. If I had more time, we could easily go half an hour longer. So today we featured Richard Turrin, best-selling author of China's Digital Currency Revolution. The book is called Cashless, and that's Richard Turrin, spelled Turrin. I thought it was a great book. I encourage you to follow him on social media to get the book, to read it. And you've all heard me talk a lot about fintech, about more global perspective, and about central bank digital currencies, of course, about crypto and digital assets. And this has been a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground. You were very open in terms of your responses. Besides buying your book and following you, are there any other services, consulting on interaction in Asia, fintech, investing in China, where a family of wealth and resources may want to reach out and connect? Is there any way they could do that if you do that?
Yeah, sure. So the answer is yes. I work with I was working with some of the larger asset managers who want perspectives on China and want to get a macro view of the tech space and fintech in China. So yeah, I do that. Best way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn or my website, richturrin.com. Look, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm super available. Please feel free to reach out. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I have these discussions about China every day. I'm a top influencer in the business, specifically on China. And the discussions that we have there are heated.
I like that.
And we don't stay away from, where I'm not afraid of any question. So, if you have China needs, look, if you're trying to understand China, if you're trying to understand China technology, if you're trying to understand where a cashless society is going to go, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you about it. It's something that I do for a living. That's pretty good. And
For sure.
LinkedIn is always free.
Yes, and that's how we connected. I'll give my close. Again, I really, really enjoyed the conversation today. I felt I learned a lot. And I think it's really important that we understand we may feel a certain way, but what could cause us to change our mind? Are we that locked into a decision that no matter what, our thesis on something's not going to change? I mean, that's not what we want to be. We want to be open-minded. So really interesting discussion on a lot of things. We'll definitely have Richard back and cover some of these subjects, which we have with multiple people, very deep. So it's always fun. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles podcast, and switching it around a little bit, the founder of Family Office Association. To learn more about being a member, being a live participant, getting the benefits that we provide to our members, master classes, in-person events, access to me, as if that's valuable. You can reach us at familyofficeassociation.com. My email is angelo@familyofficeassociation.com. I'm extremely active on social media, pretty much all the platforms you could find me. The one where we have the most interactivity with our videos and interviews, at least the ones that we put up there, not all of them make it, very far from it, is simply on YouTube. Family Office, the channel, whatever, by my name, you'll find it. Go and subscribe. It's for free. And very much look forward to the next time. Richard, you've been great. I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Angelo. It's been a blast. I love it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.